Nice.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Ben Lister Podcast Radio Show here on Hull's 107 FM. Hope you are well. As you know, the aim of this series is to interview the great and good of the radio and entertainment community all over the UK, sometimes in Hull, sometimes further afield. But hello, so welcome along to each and every one of you out there. How are you all today? Doing out there today? Brilliant. That's good. So let's crack on and meet today's big guest. It's comedian, radio personality, impressionist. He's even been, I think he was Doradale. It's the one and only. You can see him on the left hand side. The legendary broadcasting icon, Mr. Jake Yapp. Hello, Jake. Welcome along.
Hello. I've never had either of those words applied to me, neither legendary nor icon. So thank you. That's amazing. I'm going to keep those.
Did I do my research correctly? Were you the Dora Dale?
Yeah. I mean, that was the most amazing. No one. Yeah. Yes. Yes. I was Dora Dale. So it's a little old lady character that I do. It's a weird thing because it was Martin Kelner who first aired any Dora Dale, and he was of course famous for airing Mrs. Merton, who was another little old lady character, played by Caroline Aherne, a few years before that. So I don't know what it is about him and little old ladies, but
It's a shame It's a shame Dora and Mrs. Merton never met.
It's heartbreaking. I genuinely would have loved that. I thought she was such a fantastic creation, and Caroline Aherne was so brilliant, and there was always that very playful kind of twinkle in her eye that I think allowed her to get away with some very caustic material.
I
I don't know.
also I also personally like as well John you look at John Culshaw and people like that.
Yeah, yeah, he's fantastic. I've done some work with John Culshaw. We wrote some sketches where I think he was pretending to be Father Christmas for the Radio One breakfast show. But this was obviously he's not the real Father Christmas, and therefore behaved very, very badly. It was the 90s. It was that kind of thing. And so we did all these sketches for Chris Moyles, where Father Christmas was just being awful, particularly to his elves. I think they ended up in the dungeon a lot. It was pretty dark.
Yeah, and also you look at people like I also like as well a few other comedians. I've had a few comedians on this podcast. Like I also had the guy from Phoenix Nights, Toby Foster.
Great. Yeah, amazing.
And I'm also hopefully fingers crossed on one of the podcasts, Justin Morehouse maybe.
Brilliant. Yeah, he's wonderful. I saw him in Leeds actually. He was terrific.
Yeah. Have you ever
Well,
met Peter Kay before?
no, no. I mean, he is such a massive star. He's kind of in another league, isn't he, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
You're yeah, we've yeah, as I say. Anyway, that's good. How are you? You're all right today. That's good. Yeah. Six
Yeah.
questions about your broadcast career, if that's okay.
I mean, I don't think my career will stretch to 6 questions, but let's see what happens.
Okay, cool. Let's go. You ready to rumble in the jungle here in the 107 FM jungle?
Oh, definitely. It's my favorite jungle.
Okay, let's hit the go button and record. Question one. Where did you start your broadcast and comedy career?
Well, technically, I started on Radio 4. There used to be a show called Weekending. It was like a weekly topical sketch show. And the special thing about that was that they would read unsolicited material. So anyone could send stuff in. And there also used to be an open meeting once a week in London. And it was literally half term. I was 16, and me and my friend went to the meeting. And in the meeting, they tell you what they were looking for sketches on. And we wrote some sketches, and we got one on. And then it got on Pick of the Week. And my career has gone downhill ever since. But my friend actually is Gareth P. Jones, who's now a very successful children's writer. And I'm just emptying the bins here and there, really. So that was my first writing thing. And the first time I did stuff on air. I guess it was probably with Martin Kelner in Thames Valley FM. That was where I did my first ever. I was sidekicking for him, and then I got to do a cover show for him. So that was when I did my first ever show.
Yeah.
So yeah.
In the studio next door to Martin Kellner's Talk Radio studio, before him on James Wales show, he had Zippy.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Imagine that. That would be it. That would be something. I love Zippy. I'm a big fan of puppets generally. I did have a job once. I was Asda's chief, only puppeteer. I used to operate a puppet of an Asda store manager at their managers' conferences in Birmingham. It was a very strange job. And if you've never done puppeteering, it is so hard. And it's hard because you have to, if you put your hand up in the air, hold it there and work it, move it around, and do that for 10 minutes and see how your arm feels. It is crucifyingly painful.
Before we go on to question 2, would you ever have a go at puppeteering Zippy?
Oh, I'd love to have a go on Zippy. Because everybody has a go at his voice. That was bad. Everybody has a go. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd love to. Are you kidding? And it was the same guy, wasn't it, who did Zippy and George?
Yeah, there was a guy. I think his name was Ronnie something.
Ron something. Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Because
I was the guy. If we're going to get onto Zippy, I was the guy who first ever uncovered the footage of the Rude rainbow, which I mean I think a lot of people have now seen. It was like a Christmas tape. And I was the guy that first aired it. I was working on a show called TV Offal for a guy called Victor Lewis Smith, who I think we'll probably talk about more later. But my job was to just find weird TV. This is long before YouTube existed. You know, there just wasn't a repository of odd stuff. So you had to literally manually go and hunt it out. And I got talking to this guy who'd been like a studio technician at the BBC, I think. And he was like, do you know about the Christmas tapes? And I said, I've heard stories about the Christmas tapes. And so every regional place like Yorkshire Television or Southern Television or Tyne Tees or whatever, the engineers would put together a Christmas tape, and there'd be like outtakes and stuff, but then they'd do funny sketches and they'd ask people who presented shows to do little special bits for them. And so they got Rainbow to do a dirty version of Rainbow. And this guy was really cagey about it, like releasing the tapes. He was like, I want 200 and I want it in cash. I was like, okay. And it was literally like, he handed me a jiffy bag. He was like, you haven't seen me. This didn't come from me, okay. I was like, okay, fine. And what's really weird is that years later, Charlie Brooker, he talked about the Christmas tapes on his Screenwipe series. And he made reference to meeting this guy in this very secretive, clandestine way. And he said, oh, I did this once before for Victor Lewis Smith. And I met a guy and I sold him the tapes then. And he's talking about me. And I remember watching this Charlie Brooker show and going, I did that. That was me. I was that guy. I was the guy that first put it on TV. Now you can find it on the internet all over the place. It is very rude, but it's good fun.
Yeah, it's brilliant. All these archival tapes, and also I like John Culshaw because I think he was involved along with Steve Coogan and a few others on Spitting Image. John Culshaw.
Yeah. I mean,
I like John Culshaw's rendition of President Trump.
Yes, it's fantastic. It's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have to say the guy who did the President Trump on Larry and Paul, I know you've had Larry and Paul on this, on their show was amazing. Worth checking out if you haven't seen it. It's on YouTube.
Yeah, they do a lot more visual stuff nowadays.
Yeah,
they're great. Question 2: who were your early inspirations and influences when you were starting out at the bottom of the broadcasting comedy ladder?
You know, going way back to when I was sort of 10, I was raised on things like The Goon Show and Round the Horn, shows like that, and I loved them. But then it was actually Victor Lewis Smith, so who I ended up working for. He used to do stuff on Radio 4, And he then did some TV shows. He did a show called Inside Victor Lewis Smith, and he had a series on Radio 1 that was amazing. And he made radio that like no one else did. I mean, I've never heard anything really before or since. Multi-layered stuff, incredibly rich, very, very strong, very polemic comedy, and stupid comedy as well. A huge variety of stuff. He did all the music. It was just this incredibly dense, rich soundscape that he built, and devastatingly funny. Absolutely took no prisoners, and I thought he was amazing. And I kind of wrote him a fan letter in crayon, and then I got some work working in production at Radio 4 and then at Radio 2, and I bumped into him a couple of times. And the next thing I knew, I got a call from him saying, "Do you want a job?" And he was making a new series called TV Offal on Channel 4. And I worked as a researcher and writer on the first series. I wrote the songs for the first series, or a lot of the songs. And then I produced and directed the second series. And he remains, I think, one of the absolute greatest masters of radio comedy. I mean, he is unparalleled. I would defy anyone to find anything so good. People talk a lot about Chris Morris, but Chris Morris, he started out by trying to sort of take off Victor Lewis Smith. I think he said he sent a letter to Loose Ends saying, "I could do what Victor Lewis Smith does." And I love Chris Morris, but he didn't quite manage to do what Victor Lewis Smith did. He's done some amazing things subsequently.
Do you like Alan Partridge at all, or Steve Coogan?
Oh, I absolutely love Alan Partridge, and I think there isn't a broadcaster in the world, in the UK, that doesn't see a little bit of Alan Partridge in themselves. Like I guarantee you, anyone who's ever sat in front of an open microphone has had a moment of going, "Oh God, I'm Alan Partridge." It just happens. There's so much truth to that character. I can't think of a character that isn't as well inhabited. You know, it's just living, breathing flesh. He's so real, and it's so painful. I mean, it's fantastic.
Alan Partridge isn't Alan Partridge if ever they got rid of Steve Coogan and brought someone else in, because Steve Coogan is Alan Partridge.
You couldn't. You can, you know, be like, I don't know, someone else trying to do Tommy Cooper. I mean, I know people try and do that, but you just couldn't. Yeah, it would just no.
Have you ever met Mr. Coogan?
I haven't, and I mean, I don't know what I'd do. You know, there are very few people. Because I worked in production a lot. I've met a lot of sort of celebrities. I met Hollywood celebrities. I met all kinds of people. I once nearly sat on David Copperfield, you know, the magician guy.
Yeah.
Basically, he was wearing a very loose fit black leather outfit, black trousers and a black leather jacket, and he was sitting on a loose fitting black leather sofa in the green room of Radio 2. And I just didn't see him. He was lying on it. And so I just sat on him because he just blended in with the sofa. And it was almost like one of his illusions, because it just looked like a dismembered head at the end of the sofa. He wasn't very impressed. But so what I'm saying is I don't generally get starstruck. I worked on the World Music Awards. I once opened for Beyonce. I'm very proud of that. But I think if I met Steve Coogan or Paul Whitehouse, I would be pretty much speechless. I think they're incredible.
I'd end up saying, if ever I met Steve Coogan or someone like that, I'd end up doing one of Alan Partridge's catchphrases.
I mean, I dare say that happens, and I dare say that happens to him a lot. And I'm sure he's very gracious about it.
Yeah, because Alan Partridge, as you say, is a radio cult figure to people.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. There's way too much truth in it as a character to be comfortable.
Yeah. Question 3 now. What is your favourite part about the job?
I think it's the variety, and I think it's the immediacy. I've worked in TV, and I've worked in radio, and I've worked in production in both, and I've worked in presentation in both. And the joy of radio is you open the microphone, and very often you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. There's always going to be a moment of serendipity. and it's that makes radio so seductive. It's so immediate. You can have an idea, you can make it can be on air in an unfeasibly short amount of time. I mean, it can happen in the moment. I did a radio show this morning, and our idea for a phone-in topic just kind of happened in the middle of a conversation, and it just changed the direction of the whole show, and for the better. And I love that. I used to do sketches for Sean Keaveney's breakfast show on Six Music, and the way it worked is they would email me at 6:45 in the morning. I'd work from home, and they'd say, "Can we have something on this news story and this and this?" There'd be three, and then I'd have rolling 1 hour deadlines to write, record, edit, and mix a finished sketch based on that news story. But I'd be on standby, and I'd make jingles and all sorts of things for them. And my record was Sean said something about granola and how great granola is, and he put on a record, and in the 3.5 minutes that record ran for, I had written and recorded and mixed a fake advert for granola and emailed it to them. They'd loaded it onto their system, and they played it straight off the back of the record. So I'd made the whole thing in under 3 minutes, and the thing lasted about 45 seconds. And that was fast. I'm not saying it was that funny, but the turnaround was so fast, and there's no other medium you could do that with. I think that's what I love about it.
Yeah, that's it for part one of my interview with Jake Yapp. So join me in a bit for part two. But for now, back to the studio. Welcome back to part two of my podcast radio show here on 107 FM, still chatting to Mr. Jake Yapp, aka Dora Dale. 3 more questions, if that's okay, Jake.
Shoot, let's do it.
Yep, that's good. You ready to go? Ready? You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Question 4. What is your greatest radio moment?
Do you know, I was thinking about this. I had my own series on Radio 4. I've done some fairly prestigious. I did the only live show there's ever been on Radio 4 Extra. But I think the greatest moment, and it wasn't even my show, I was working in Nottingham on a station that was called 106 FM at the time. And it was fairly early on, and I did 7 till 10 in the evening, and there was a guy after me called Mark Keane. He's a very nice man, and he did from 10 p.m. onwards, and it was a phone-in. And sometimes he would say, "Do you mind staying on a bit, just while we wait for some calls to come in?" And so I would stay for a bit, and we'd just talk on air. And it was one evening, and we were talking, and a guy phoned up who called himself Mr. Boring. And he embarked on this very, very long story about being on a bus. I think it was literally about, and in the end, I missed my bus stop or something. It was a nothing story. It went nowhere, but I can't describe. It had taken, 5, maybe even 6 minutes of airtime for him to get to this absolute nothing of a kind of punchline to the story of, right, and I missed my bus stop. And we waited for so long, kind of going, oh God, this story is so long. There has to be a hell of a payoff. And it just didn't come. And me and Mark looked at each other and just exploded with laughter. Like, we couldn't stop laughing because it was that nervous tension laughter, because we were like, what's happening? We've just lost control of this radio station, basically, to this guy called Mr. Boring. And I genuinely fell off my chair. I was on my knees. I wasn't even making any noise anymore. I was just sort of doing a very quiet wheezing kind of. And Mark was the same. The two of us were just broken laughing. And all you could hear on air was us off microphone, just sort of wheezing and trying to breathe. And this guy who was still on the phone just going, hello, hello. And that lasted for probably another 2 minutes. And like I say, there was nothing special about it. But I think if you tuned in at that moment, you would just wonder what on earth had happened. It was a great moment. It was the funniest moment I've ever had in broadcasting.
Yeah, and was that, I remember 106 FM, was that in Nottingham, which is now Gem?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's right. It was in a small building on a sort of wasteland just on the outskirts of Nottingham city centre. And we were shown all these plans about how this huge shopping centre and plaza was going to be erected around the radio station. It was all going to be great. And I went back, I don't know what it's like now, but I went back probably 15 years later, and it was still just a wasteland with this one isolated building on it.
Yeah, 90. And were you there at launch? Because they had Corrie
Yeah.
stars come down.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah. How do you know all that? That's
Because I
amazing.
watched the documentary, because ITV Central did a documentary about it.
I think I'm in that.
And then there was one called Trouble at the Top about when it became Century.
Really? I'd love to
Yeah,
see that.
about John Myers.
Okay. I remember that launch thing, and I remember there being cameras. Me and someone in the sort of sales department, the advert sales department, we kept having competitions about our packed lunches, like who had the snazziest lunchbox. And I stayed up really late, bolting my lunchbox to a remote control car, so that we had another competition. And he was like, check out my lunchbox. I was like, sure, I expect you're wondering where mine is. And then I pulled the remote control out of my pocket and then just drove my lunch into the office. I don't know. I had a lot of time on my hands in those days.
And one of the other people who was in charge of it as well was a man called David Lloyd,
Yes, that's right.
who
Yeah, I
was
think that was him.
who's a legend in radio himself.
Yes. We had long conversations about what we were and weren't allowed to say on air, in terms of,
He had a very deep voice, David.
yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow. I'd love to see that documentary. If you know where it is, or you can send me a copy, I'd love that.
It's on somebody's YouTube channel, them documentaries, but I'll send you a link in a bit. Anyway,
Amazing.
question 5 now. How has the last 2 years affected your life and line of work?
Well, I mean, I know it's affected everyone, and in a way, it didn't. At first, it kind of affected it positively. If I'm completely honest, my career sort of fell off a bit of a cliff in 2019. I kind of know why. It wasn't anything I'd done, but the work had really kind of dried up, um, quite suddenly. And then the pandemic hit, and actually then work started coming in. So I did a series for Radio 4 called Now Wash Your Hands, which was, it was commissioned within, I think it was on air within 10 days of the lockdown beginning. And it was the only lockdown radio commission I think that happened. And I was quite proud of it. It was me and John Holmes and others, and I did a lot of songs for that, which are still online. If you said there was a great, if I'm honest, it was a great song. It was called "Waving Through the Window," and Jess Robinson, who's an amazing singer and impressionist, she sang it, and I got a guy called Harry the piano to play it. And you can see it and hear it on the BBC's website.
Before we go on to the last question, when was the last time you had been in a studio properly?
Prior to what, before lockdown or since lockdown?
Before and since.
So I used to, I was still sort of regularly doing things for Radio 4 Extra. I sometimes host the comedy club on that, which is great. So it had been comparatively recent, and then lockdown happened, and then everything had to be done remotely. I was lucky because I had a home studio already. I've been sort of making stuff from home for a long time, and so yeah, and then it was a very long time until I was sort of allowed back in a building, and it was quite disconcerting when it happened. I think I had to voice something in Soho, and the protocols and the hand washing and the masks and everything, and it was a slightly nerve-wracking time. But it was so nice to get back to actually seeing people face to face, and there's nothing like it. Working from home is wonderful. But for me, being in a proper studio, actually with people, I've been doing a breakfast show this week, and there's just nothing like sitting in a studio with other people. It's the best feeling.
What station did you do the breakfast show on?
I've been doing Jack FM, so I voice a lot of their sponsorship and stuff. But I'm sort of their designated cover presenter, and I've loved it. It's a long time since I've done a live radio show where I'm driving the desk, and it's been great to kind of rework those muscles and feel myself clunkingly getting back up to speed, but very clunkingly.
That's good. My last question on the list is we've got 9 minutes in the Zoom room. So, what advice would you give to young, aspiring broadcasters who are starting out right now in the middle of bleep, bleep, bleep and in the middle of what's going on in the world at the moment?
I would say if you want to do live stuff, do it. Listen to people who do it really, really well. I've been listening to Magic Breakfast recently, and when you hear a really well put together commercial music based breakfast show, and you hear just how slick and how tight it is and how well structured it is, it's just amazing. And of course, 107 FM being a great case in point. But listen and learn and deconstruct what goes into that. But I'd say if you're looking to make recorded stuff, where you record an interview or a podcast or something like that, and the great thing is anyone can do that now. You can do it with a phone. That's all you need. Definitely do it. But editing is everything. And you have to be really disciplined about that, because not every word you utter is gold. And actually, if there's a bit where you're sitting around laughing your head off, having said how funny it was laughing my head off with Mark Keane all those years ago, unless you are absolutely certain it's going to be as funny for your listener, be a little self-disciplined in terms of how much of that you keep in. Editing is everything.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. And yeah, and that's it for today. Thank you for joining me on 107 FM, Mr. Jake.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be asked.
Hope you lot all enjoyed it and learned something. Remember to live your best life, achieve your dreams, and love and look after each other. We are unfortunately out of time, so thank you very much to my special guest today, Mr. Jake Yapp. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and do join me again soon for another podcast. But for now, that's a wrap, and back to the studio.